The salt was in the sugar jar. Hannah Garrett discovered this at 5:30 in the morning while making biscuits in the kitchen of the Holloway Ranch, and she knew immediately it had not gotten there by accident. She had checked the jar the night before. It had been sugar. Now it was salt, which meant one of the three girls had crept down in the darkness and switched them, the same way they had hidden the milk 2 days ago and put rocks in the flour barrel the week before that, the same way they had driven off the last cook and the one before her and the one before that. 6 women in 8 months, all of them run off by 3 children who had decided no woman would ever replace their mother. Hannah set down the jar. She looked at the ruined biscuit dough. Then she scraped it into the slop bucket, got out fresh flour, and started over. Upstairs, she heard the creak of floorboards. Someone was listening. Someone wanted to hear her quit. If you have ever been tested by someone who needed to know whether you would stay, you understand the stillness in Hannah's hands right now. This is the story of a woman who came to cook for a widowed cowboy and his 3 daughters who had turned sabotage into a science, and what happened when she refused to be the 7th woman to walk away. If this is the kind of story that gets under your skin and stays there, subscribe so the next one finds you. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story can reach. Because what those 3 girls did not know, listening to Hannah work in the pre-dawn kitchen, was that the big, quiet woman making fresh biscuits from memory was the first person in 8 months who understood exactly what they were doing. And why. Hannah was 43 years old. She had never married. She had spent the last 20 years cooking in boarding houses and hotels across Montana and Wyoming, moving when the work dried up, or the pay got too low, or the owner decided a woman her size made the dining room look too crowded. She was large, not tall, but broad and solid, the kind of woman who took up space no matter how carefully she tried not to. She had learned to live with the stares and the comments, and the way people assumed she was lazy or greedy or lacking in self-control, simply because her body did not conform to what they expected. She kept her head down. She did her work. She moved on when staying became impossible. By the spring of 1892, she was working in a hotel kitchen in Copper Falls when the owner's wife decided Hannah's presence was inappropriate for a respectable establishment and let her go without explanation or wages owed. Hannah packed her bag and walked to the telegraph office. She sent inquiries to every town within 100 miles. The only response came from a man named Caleb Holloway in Bear Creek Ridge. Need cook immediately. 3 children. Remote ranch. $60 for 6 months. Arrive by end of May. She arrived on the 28th of May with her bag and her knives, and the low expectations that came from 2 decades of being treated like a problem instead of a person. Caleb Holloway met her at the ranch gate with a wagon and a look of barely concealed desperation. He was somewhere in his middle 30s, weathered and lean with dark blonde hair and eyes that looked like they had not slept properly in months. He said, "You are the 7th cook I have hired since October. The other 6 lasted an average of 3 weeks. My daughters do not want you here. They will do everything they can to make you leave. If you are not prepared for that, tell me now, and I will pay your stage fare back to Copper Falls." Hannah looked at him. She said, "Why do they not want me here?" He said, "Because their mother died a year ago, and they think if they can keep me from hiring anyone, she might come back." He said it flatly, like he had explained it too many times, and the words had worn smooth. "They are wrong, but they are children, and they are grieving, and I do not know how to reach them anymore." Hannah said, "How old are they?" He said, 12, 10, and 7. Maggie is the oldest. She is the planner. Lily is the middle. She is the executor. And Bess is the youngest. She is the lookout. He looked at Hannah. "They work together. They are smart. They are ruthless, and they will test you." Hannah said, "I am not afraid of children." He said, "You should be." The ranch house was larger than most, 2 stories, a wide porch, a separate kitchen building connected to the main house by a covered walkway. Caleb carried Hannah's bag into the small room off the kitchen and said, "This is yours. Breakfast at sunrise, lunch at noon, supper at sundown. I work the ranch with my 2 hired men. The girls are supposed to do their lessons in the morning, but they do not. They will find you, and they will test you. When you have had enough, tell me. I will pay you what you are owed and get you back to town." Hannah said, "What happened to the last cook?" He said, "They put a snake in her bed. Before that, it was a bucket of water over the door. Before that, it was lye soap in the morning coffee. Before that—" He stopped. He looked tired. "It does not matter. They always win." Hannah said, "We will see." The first test came that night. Hannah had made supper, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, greens from the garden, biscuits that had turned out perfectly despite the salt incident that morning. She set the table and called the girls. They came in slowly, one at a time, and sat without speaking. Maggie was thin and dark-haired like her father, with sharp eyes that catalogued everything. Lily was softer, rounder, with light brown hair and braids. Bess was small and blonde, and looked younger than 7. All 3 of them stared at Hannah like she was an invader. Hannah set the food on the table and sat down. No one moved. Finally, Caleb said, "Eat." Maggie picked up her fork. She took a bite of potato. She chewed slowly. Then she said, "It is cold." Hannah said, "It is hot. I just took it off the stove." Maggie said, "It tastes cold." Lily said, "Mine too." Bess said, "Mine is cold and it has no salt." Hannah looked at the 3 of them. She looked at Caleb, who had his head in his hands. Then she stood up, picked up her plate, and ate standing at the counter with her back to the table. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. She ate in silence, and when she was finished, she washed her plate and went to her room. The second test came the next morning. Hannah woke at 4:30 to find the kitchen door barred from the outside. Someone had stacked firewood against it during the night, so it would not open. Hannah stood there for a moment, looking at the door. Then she went out through the window. The third test came that afternoon. Hannah had left bread dough rising on the counter. When she came back from the root cellar, the dough was gone. She found it an hour later in the chicken coop, covered in feathers and dirt. Hannah scraped it into the waste bucket, washed the bowl, and started new dough. The fourth test came at supper. Hannah had made stew. When she served it, Lily said, "There is something in mine." Hannah looked. There was a button in the bowl. She removed it, replaced the stew, and said nothing. The fifth test came in the middle of the night. Hannah woke to the sound of her door opening. She did not move. She lay still and listened. Someone small crept into the room, moved around for a moment, then crept back out. In the morning, Hannah discovered all her undergarments had been tied in knots so tight it would take an hour to undo them. She put them in a basket, set them aside, and wore what she had on. The sixth test came 3 days later. Hannah had hung laundry on the line behind the kitchen. When she went to bring it in, every piece had been cut into strips. Not torn, cut with scissors, deliberately. Someone had spent time on this. Hannah gathered the strips, brought them inside, and spent the evening sewing them back together into patchwork garments that would hold until she could afford new fabric. The seventh test came at breakfast. Hannah had made eggs and bacon. She set the plates down and turned to get the coffee. When she turned back, all 3 girls were staring at their plates with identical expressions of horror. Maggie said, "There are eggshells in mine." Lily said, "Mine has hair." Bess said, "Mine is moving." Hannah looked at each plate. There were no eggshells. There was no hair. Nothing was moving. But all 3 girls pushed their plates away and refused to eat. Hannah said, "More for me then." She ate all 3 breakfasts herself, while the girls watched in stunned silence. The 8th test came on Sunday. Hannah had baked pies for after church, 3 of them, apple and carefully covered with cloth. When the family returned from town, all 3 pies were gone. Not eaten. Gone. Hannah found them an hour later, buried in the garden, tins and all. Dirt packed so carefully around them it had taken effort. Hannah dug them up, washed the tins, and made 3 more pies from the preserves she had put up the week before. This went on for 2 weeks. The girls moved her things. They hid ingredients. They salted her coffee. They put grease on the door handles. They left anonymous notes that said, "Go away, and we do not want you, and you will leave like the others." They loosened the legs on her chair so it would collapse when she sat down. They hid live frogs in her flour barrel. They replaced her good wool shawl with one full of burrs, and every single time, Hannah cleaned up the mess, fixed what was broken, and kept cooking. Caleb watched this with increasing alarm. On the 15th day, after the girls had hidden all the plates, and Hannah had served supper on cleaned planks of wood, he said, "Why are you still here?" Hannah was washing the planks. She said, "Because you hired me to cook. I am cooking." He said, "They are making your life hell." She said, "Yes." He said, "Most people would have left by now." She said, "I am not most people." He said, "Why not?" She turned to look at him. She said, "Because I understand what they are doing." He said, "What are they doing?" She said, They are asking me if I am going to stay. Every test is the same question, and every time I stay, I am answering it." He stared at her. He said, "You think they want you to stay?" She said, "No, they want me to leave." But what they need is for someone to stay. They need proof that not everyone goes away when things get hard. She dried her hands. She said, "Their mother left. I know she did not choose to leave, but she left. And then 6 women came and left. So in their minds, everyone leaves. They are testing me to see if I am the same, and I am not." Caleb said, "How long are you going to let them do this?" Hannah said, "As long as it takes." The breaking point came on the 16th day. Hannah woke to find the entire kitchen destroyed, every dish broken, every pot overturned, flour and sugar and salt mixed together on the floor in a paste, the stove cold and deliberately dismantled. It would take hours to clean. It would take longer to fix. And standing in the doorway, watching her, were 3 girls who looked both defiant and terrified. Hannah stood in the middle of the ruined kitchen. She looked at the mess. She looked at the girls. Then she walked past them into the main house, found the broom, and came back. She started sweeping. She did not yell. She did not threaten. She did not tell Caleb. She swept the floor. She washed the dishes that could be saved. She reassembled the stove. She worked in silence for 3 hours, and the entire time the 3 girls stood in the doorway and watched. Finally, Maggie said, "Why are you not leaving?" Hannah stopped sweeping. She said, "Because I do not leave." Lily said, "Everyone leaves." Hannah said, "I do not." Bess said, "You are supposed to get mad." Hannah said, "I am not mad." Maggie said, "Why not?" Hannah set down the broom. She walked over to where the girls were standing and crouched down so she was at their level. She said, "Because I know why you did this. You want to see if I am like the others. You want to know if I am going to walk away the first time things get hard. And I am telling you right now, I am not. You can hide my things. You can ruin my kitchen. You can put salt in my sugar and snakes in my bed, and I will still be here in the morning, because that is what staying means. It means you do not leave just because someone makes it hard." Maggie said, "You do not know us." Hannah said, "You are right, I do not. But I know what it feels like when someone leaves and does not come back. And I know what it feels like to want someone to stay so badly you would do anything to test them first." She stood up. She said, "So test me. I will pass." The 3 girls stared at her. Then Bess started crying. Not loud, but quietly, the way children cry when something inside them breaks open. Lily put her arm around her sister. Maggie looked at Hannah and said, "Our mother is not coming back, is she?" Hannah said, "No, she is not." Maggie said, "And you are not our mother." Hannah said, "No, I am not." Maggie said, "But you are staying?" Hannah said, "Yes." Maggie looked at her sisters. She looked at the ruined kitchen. Then she said, "We will help you clean it up." They worked together for the rest of the morning. The girls swept while Hannah washed. They sorted the broken dishes from the salvageable ones. They scrubbed the floor. They restacked the wood. And when Caleb came in for lunch and saw the 4 of them working side by side, he stopped in the doorway and stared. Hannah said, "There was an accident. We are fixing it." Caleb looked at his daughters. He said, "What kind of accident?" Maggie said, "The kind where we were testing someone and they did not leave." He said, "And?" Lily said, "And we think maybe she is different." Bess said, "And we are sorry." Caleb looked at Hannah. She shrugged. She said, "We are working it out." After that, things changed. The girls stopped sabotaging. They started helping. Maggie learned to knead bread. Lily learned to pluck chickens. Bess learned to set the table without breaking anything. They followed Hannah the way ducklings follow their mother, not because she asked them to, but because she let them. She taught them to cook and clean and mend. She answered their questions. She listened when they talked about their mother. She did not try to replace what they had lost. She simply made space for what remained. Caleb watched this transformation with something close to disbelief. One evening in July, after the girls had gone to bed, he said, "I do not understand how you did that." Hannah was mending one of Lily's dresses. She said, "I did not do anything. I stayed. That is all." He said, "No, it is more than that. Those girls have been feral for a year, and now they follow you everywhere. They listen to you. They ask you questions. Bess told me yesterday you were teaching her to read." Hannah said, "She asked me to." He said, "She has not asked anyone to do anything in months. What did you say to them?" Hannah set down the dress. She said, "I told them I was not leaving, and then I proved it." He said, "How?" She said, "By staying when they tried to make me go. Children do not need perfect people. They need people who stay." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "You are not what I expected." She said, "What did you expect?" He said, "Someone who would quit, someone who would get angry, someone who would demand I discipline them or fix them or make them behave." He paused. He said, "Someone temporary." She said, "And now?" He said, "Now I am realizing you are not temporary, and I do not want you to be." Hannah looked at him. She said, "What are you saying?" He said, "I am saying my daughters need you. This house needs you. And I—" He stopped. He looked at the fire. He said, "I need you, not as a cook, as a partner, as someone who will stay when things are hard, as someone who already proved they will not leave." Hannah said, "You do not know me." He said, "I know you stayed when no one else would. I know my daughters trust you. I know you have made this house feel like a home again. That is enough." She said, "What are you asking?" He said, "I am asking if you would consider staying permanently, not as someone I hired, as my wife, as their mother, as the person who holds this family together, because God knows I have not been able to do it alone." Hannah was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I am not a small woman. I am not the kind of woman men choose when they have options. People will talk." He said, "Let them. I do not care what people think. I care that my daughters are happy again. I care that this house is warm again. I care that someone finally stayed." She said, "I am not temporary." He said, "I know. That is why I am asking." She said, "Then yes." They married in August in the small church in Bear Creek Ridge. The girls stood with them, Maggie holding the ring, Lily holding the flowers, Bess holding Hannah's hand. The preacher said the words, and Caleb kissed Hannah's forehead, and Bess said, loud enough for the whole church to hear, "Does this mean she is not going to leave?" Hannah knelt down. She said, "This means I am never going to leave." Bess said, "Promise?" Hannah said, "Promise." The years that followed were good years. Hannah and Caleb ran the ranch together. The girls grew up. Maggie became a teacher. Lily married a rancher from the next valley over. Bess went to nursing school in Denver and came back to work at the clinic in Bear Creek Ridge. They all came home for Sunday dinners. They all brought their children, and every one of those children learned the story of how their grandmother had been tested by 3 grieving girls and had refused to leave. Maggie told her children, "She stayed when everyone else left. That is how I learned what love looks like." Lily told her children, "She never tried to replace our mother. She just made space for us. That is how I learned what family means." Bess told her children, "She promised she would never leave, and she kept that promise. That is how I learned what a promise is worth." Hannah and Caleb had 28 years together. When Caleb died in the winter of 1920, Hannah buried him on the ridge overlooking the ranch. At the graveside, Maggie stood beside her and said, "What are you going to do now?" Hannah said, "I am going to stay." Maggie said, "Here? Alone?" Hannah said, "This is my home. I do not leave." She lived another 14 years. She kept the house. She cooked Sunday dinners for her daughters and their families. She taught her grandchildren to make bread and mend clothes and stay when things got hard. And every time one of them asked her why she had stayed when the girls had tried so hard to drive her away, she said the same thing. Because staying is not about whether someone makes it easy. It is about deciding who you are. And I am someone who stays. When Hannah died in 1934, they buried her beside Caleb. The 3 daughters stood at the graveside together, Maggie, Lily, and Bess, all grown now, with gray in their hair and children of their own. They held hands the way they had held hands as girls, and Maggie said, "She kept her promise." Lily said, "She always kept her promises." Bess said, "She taught us how to stay." The headstone they commissioned read, "She refused to leave. We refused to let her." And below that, "Some people are family because they stay." The ranch stayed in the family for 5 generations. The kitchen where Hannah had swept up the salt and flour and broken dishes was preserved exactly as it had been. And every Holloway child who grew up in that house was told the same story. There was a time when 3 girls tried to drive away a woman who was too big, too quiet, too stubborn to leave. And that woman became their mother not because she was chosen first, but because she stayed when staying was hardest. Because that is what family does. Family stays.